The desert had been silent for hours before the hum began again. A low vibration faint at first, like the earth exhaling beneath the mesa. Travis Taylor stood on the east field of Skinwalker Ranch, his eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat as the wind carried the faint metallic taste that always seemed to precede something unexplainable. Around him, the research team moved in slow, deliberate motions, each person checking cables, tightening clamps, calibrating sensors. Once long before the current team took over, but the findings had been sealed away, locked behind classified reports and bureaucratic silence. Now it was up to them, independent scientists armed with drones, sensors, and an unrelenting curiosity to reveal what others had only whispered about. Eric Bard crouched beside a heavy case near the UTV, carefully connecting the final wire from a 1.2 gigahertz transmitter to a signal generator. "Frequency's clean," he said, his voice measured steady. "Once we activate this, there shouldn't be any interference unless the bubble reacts." Travis gave a small nod, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "That's what we're counting on." To the north, Jim Royston was prepping his LiDAR drone, its rotors gleaming faintly in the floodlight glow. The drone's sensors could map terrain with millimetric precision, but lately, every time it crossed certain invisible thresholds on the ranch, it had begun returning impossible readings, altitudes dropping thousands of feet below ground, or ascending into the sky far beyond its flight path. Tonight's experiment was designed to confront that anomaly head-on. Beside them, Thomas Winterton secured a small helium-powered platform, a hybrid of balloon and kite they called the helikite. It floated with eerie steadiness above the field, a gentle, ghostly presence tethered by silver cord. The plan was simple: fly the helikite directly into the eastern boundary of the invisible bubble, carrying a payload of instruments that would transmit live telemetry back to Eric's system in the command trailer. If something invisible was really there, they would find out soon enough. "Ready when you are." Thomas called out, tugging once on the line to test the lift. The helikite swayed slightly, its surface catching the beam of the work lights like pale skin under a scalpel. "All right," Travis said, "let's make some history." They began the countdown, 5, 4, 3, and with a gentle push, the helikite ascended, rising above the east field, its shadow vanishing into the dark. The line unwound smoothly as it drifted upward and eastward directly into the invisible region mapped by LiDAR as the perimeter of the bubble. Eric's monitors lit up with live data altitude temperature signal strength. Everything looked stable for the first 30 seconds. Then suddenly, the readings began to jump. "Hold up," Eric muttered. "That can't be right. The GPS tag's diving underground." Travis frowned, turning toward him. "What do you mean underground?" "I mean, it's showing negative elevation 5,000 feet below the surface." That wasn't possible. Not even a malfunctioning chip could fabricate data like that so consistently. Travis leaned over the display eyes, scanning the wild cascade of numbers. "It's just like last year at Dry Gulch Creek," Eric continued, "when my tracker went below the ground. Same pattern." The team exchanged glances. Every time they thought they had isolated one phenomenon, another would rise in its place, threading together into a web of strange correlations. Electromagnetic surges, GPS errors, unexplained lights, all converging around this invisible sphere that seemed to stretch across the property, encompassing air, soil, and possibly something beyond both. "Keep it steady," Travis ordered. "Let's see what happens when it hits the boundary." Seconds later, the helikite drifted into the zone. On Eric's screen, a new signal appeared, a thin, vertical line glowing beside the steady broadcast of 1.2 gigahertz. "That's not ours," he whispered. Jim, who had been preparing to launch his drone, froze. "What's happening?" "Signal interference," Eric said. "It appeared exactly when the helikite entered the bubble." Jim frowned and looked down at his tablet. "That's weird, my drone's not responding. I can't get it to take off." Travis turned sharply. "You're telling me a balloon in the sky is grounding your drone?" "I'm telling you, I've reset the system 3 times and it won't lift." The tension in the air deepened. Travis stepped closer to the launch pad, staring at the inert drone. The hum of the generator filled the silence. Then, without warning, Eric's spectrum analyzer flared again. 2 signals now, pulsing side by side, one of them emanating from somewhere just beyond the helikite's position. "This is insane," Eric said. "We're not broadcasting anything new. Something's responding." "Could it be feedback?" Thomas asked. Eric shook his head. "No, it's too clean. It's like something's mimicking our frequency." Travis felt that old familiar shiver at the base of his neck. The same one he'd felt when rockets veered off course, when drones dropped from the sky, when strange lights hovered above the mesa. "Let's keep pushing," he said quietly. "See what happens if we penetrate the boundary again." He gave the order for Jim to try another launch. The drone's rotors whirred, then sputtered. Jim swore under his breath, adjusted controls, and tried again. Finally, it lifted, but only for a moment before freezing midair, refusing to advance into the bubble's perimeter. "It's like it's hitting a wall," he said. At that moment, Travis decided to go for the rocket test. He wanted to see what would happen when a physical object crossed the same line. "All right," he said, stepping back. "Rocket's hot." The team gathered as he prepared the launch. The rocket aimed squarely at the triangle, the center of the invisible bubble. The ignition flared, painting the sand in white light. 3, 2, 1, liftoff. The rocket shot upward, its trail slicing through the darkness, but almost immediately it veered hard to the north. "What the hell?" Thomas shouted. "It's not heading toward the target," Jim said. "It's like something pushed it away." Travis stared speechless. The rocket arced away from the bubble, then spiraled downward toward the mesa before vanishing into the distance. "All right," Travis muttered, gripping the remote tighter. "Let's try again." The second rocket roared to life. This time he adjusted for wind, recalibrated his angle, and fired. The missile rose fast and then swerved violently to the south. "Unbelievable," Eric said softly. It went around the bubble again. The silence that followed was thick with disbelief. The desert wind whistled through the sagebrush, but no one spoke for a long moment. Finally, Travis exhaled, his voice low. "Whatever's out there, it's not just electromagnetic interference. It's physical. Something's deflecting solid objects." "Like an energy barrier," Eric murmured. "Or a portal," Jim added, half joking, half serious. But no one laughed. They gathered around Eric's workstation again. The 1.2 gigahertz transmission was still running, but now a duplicate signal had appeared, mirrored in frequency and amplitude. It pulsed faintly, almost rhythmically, like a heartbeat. "Let's bring the helicite down," Travis said. "We've got enough for tonight." As Thomas reeled the line, the balloon swayed once more against the cold wind, descending slowly through the invisible divide. The air around it shimmered faintly, just enough for the human eye to imagine motion where none existed. When it touched down, the instruments were silent. No errors, no readings, just the dead stillness of completion. That night, back in the command center, the data played across the monitors in long ribbons of numbers. Eric scrolled through the log, his face lit by the blue glow. "You're not going to believe this," he said, tapping one file open. "When the helicite crossed the boundary, its GPS thought it was 5,000 feet underground. Just like your old data," Travis said. "Exactly, and the camera feed caught movement 4 separate times." He brought up a slowed video. Against the dim static of the night sky, something flickered, a faint blur, crossing from left to right, pausing briefly, then vanishing behind the tether line. "That's not a bug," Thomas said. "No," Eric agreed. "It's behind the string, not in front of it." Travis leaned closer. The object had no clear shape, just a distortion, a ripple of heat and light. But it moved with purpose, almost deliberate, as if circling the helicite. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the low hum of the monitors and the faint desert wind tapping against the metal walls. So Travis said, "Finally, something's reacting to us. The bubble isn't passive." Eric nodded slowly. "And it's not random either. Every anomaly correlates with that same 1.2 gigahertz band. Which means," Travis said, "we've got a pattern, and if we've got a pattern, we can map it." He straightened the exhaustion in his shoulders, giving way to a flicker of renewed determination. "Tomorrow, we go to Dry Gulch Creek, the southern boundary." Thomas nodded. "That's near where the GPS readings went underground last time." "Exactly," Travis said. "If the bubble's real, it should extend there too." The others exchanged glances, each man feeling the same pull of curiosity that had driven them here in the first place. Out on the ranch under the starlit sky, something vast and unseen was waiting. They could feel it like pressure on the air, like the deep hum of the earth beneath their boots. And in that silence, as the monitors continued to pulse with faint signals from the day's experiment, a single line of thought formed in Travis's mind, a thought that had haunted him since the first time he'd stood on this cursed, wondrous land. What if the bubble wasn't a phenomenon at all? What if it was alive? The next morning, the air above Skinwalker Ranch shimmered like a mirage. The sunlight spilled across the mesa, painting the red sandstone gold, but beneath its warmth there lingered that same low, humming undertone, almost imperceptible yet impossible to ignore. Travis Taylor stood by the convoy of UTVs, sipping black coffee from a tin mug and staring toward the south field, where the line of the creek cut through the land like an ancient scar. The team gathered in silence, Eric with his tablet and portable antenna array, Thomas adjusting the straps of his backpack, and Caleb hauling a waterproof case filled with sonar and electromagnetic sensors. They were joined by biologist Ben Woodruff, his face calm but his eyes sharp, used to reading the land in ways that machines could not. The plan was clear: trace the creek downstream until they crossed the invisible line where the bubble's southern boundary was believed to intersect with the Earth. Today, Travis said, setting down his cup, we're going to find out if this thing is more than just air. The UTVs rumbled across the field, bouncing over tufts of dry grass and patches of dark cracked soil. The creek emerged ahead, a narrow, winding vein of water cutting through sediment and stone. The air grew colder as they descended into the shallow canyon, and a faint metallic tang filled the air, the same kind that had accompanied the previous night's experiments. Eric opened his laptop on the tailgate, linking his equipment to the network of sensors spread across the property. I'm online with the command center, he said, his fingers gliding across the keys. GPS is green. Tri-field meter calibrated. Sonar ready. Good, Travis replied. Let's get this started. Ben and Thomas began unloading the kayak's small flat-bottomed crafts fitted with PVC arms that held sonar modules and waterproof cameras. Each kayak carried an independent GPS tracker, a tri-field radiation meter, and a device for measuring magnetic variance in real time. The plan was to paddle slowly along the creek, recording data as they crossed the presumed boundary. Before launching, Eric crouched beside the water and dipped his gloved hand into the current. It was ice cold, almost unnaturally so. Temperature gradients off, he muttered. There's a 5-degree drop from the surface to 2 feet down. That's odd. Could be a spring, Ben offered. Or something bleeding energy into the water, Travis said quietly. The team exchanged a look. On Skinwalker, ranch energy could mean anything. They began their descent along the creek. The sonar pinged steadily, painting the contour of the stream bed on Eric's screen. Smooth sediment, occasional boulders, nothing out of the ordinary. But as they neared the region mapped as the bubble's southern limit, the readings began to shift. Signal loss, Eric said into the radio. Tri-field meters dropping to 0. That can't be right, Thomas replied, his voice crackling through static. Even ambient background radiation never hits 0. Eric checked again. The needle sat flat. The Geiger counter, which should have been clicking steadily, was silent. Try resetting, Travis said. Already did. Still dead. The creek narrowed into a twisting gorge. Walls of red rock rose on either side, casting the water into shadow. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Even the insects had gone silent. Something's wrong with the sonar, Caleb said. It keeps losing connection. Eric frowned. Interference. It's not interference, Caleb replied, staring at the screen mounted on his kayak. It's like it's being smothered. The signal just dies. The word hung in the air. Smothered. Travis crouched beside the bank, watching as Thomas adjusted one of the sensors. Could the bubble be interfering electromagnetically? Maybe, Eric said. But this feels deeper. The magnetic field's distorting look. He turned the tablet toward them, showing a graph that pulsed erratically, lines spiking and collapsing in irregular intervals. What's the reading, Travis asked. Negative flux, Eric said, meaning the polarity's inverted. That's impossible. So is a 5,000-foot underground GPS reading. Ben, who had been standing quietly by the edge of the creek, suddenly knelt and pointed to the water. Look at this. A faint ripple was spreading across the surface, but there was no wind, no stone thrown, no visible cause. The ripple moved upstream against the current like something beneath the surface was exhaling. Eric, Travis said, "Get a frequency scan on that." Eric adjusted his equipment. The spectral analyzer flickered, then stabilized on a narrow frequency band, 1.2 gigahertz. Same as before, he said. Travis exhaled. Then it's connected. For a moment, no one spoke. The water calmed again, reflecting the canyon walls like a mirror. Then faintly, the ground beneath them trembled. Just once. A soft, quick pulse, like a heartbeat, underfoot. Did you feel that Thomas said? Yeah, Travis replied. Mark the coordinates. They pressed on. The creek curved sharply, widening into a shallow pool where the water turned still and dark. The kayaks glided to a stop. Boundary should be right ahead, Eric said, studying his display. You're within 20 feet. Thomas anchored his paddle and turned to Ben. You ready? Ben nodded, his expression calm but unreadable. Let's cross it. The kayaks drifted forward, their reflections breaking into ripples. The instant they passed the invisible threshold, every instrument on board went silent. The sonar died. The GPS froze. The radiation meters flatlined. Even the small LED displays on the equipment flickered out. Eric, we've lost everything, Thomas said into the radio. Static answered him. Eric, do you copy? Still nothing. Signal blackout, Travis said grimly. We're inside it. Ben stared down into the water. The surface was black, now opaque as oil. Something about it felt wrong too, still too perfect. The air grew colder, heavy with pressure that made their ears pop. And then faintly they heard a sound rising from below the waterline. Not a natural tone, but a low harmonic vibration like the resonance of a massive machine. What is that? Caleb whispered. Eric's voice crackled through the radio, faint and broken. We're seeing interference. Repeat interference on all bands. Then silence again. Travis knelt by the water's edge, his reflection distorted in the dark surface. Eric, he said softly, though he knew the comms were dead. If you can hear me, start recording everything. Ben leaned forward in his kayak, watching the ripple shift. There's movement, he said. Travis squinted. Something was gliding beneath the water, a faint glow, pale blue, tracing slow arcs just beneath the surface. Light anomaly, he murmured. Everyone hold position. The glow intensified, swirling like a submerged aurora. It rose toward the surface, expanding until it enveloped the pool in a faint bioluminescent haze. For a moment they could see shadows moving inside it, indistinct shapes like forms drifting just out of focus. What the hell? Thomas whispered. The glow vanished. The water went black again. A beat later, every device came back to life. Screens flickered on meters, chirped the GPS, resumed with frantic beeping. Eric's voice came through clear this time. We got you. We've got data spikes off the charts. What kind of spikes? Travis asked. Electromagnetic, Eric said. Also infrared. Something emitted a burst, short, dense, structured, like a code. Ben turned slowly toward him. A code? Pattern modulation, Eric said, scrolling rapidly through the display. Not random noise. It's repeating sequences organized in triplets, almost like communication. Travis stood silent for a long moment, the words hanging in the cold air. You're saying the bubble talked to us. Eric hesitated. I'm saying something. Inside it responded. The rest of the day blurred into controlled chaos. Back at the command center, the team gathered around Eric's console, watching the data unfold in cascading graphs. The signal was clear, consistent, and unlike anything they had ever recorded. It's narrowband, but modulated, Eric said, eyes bright with concentration. The structure's too precise for natural interference. Each burst contains harmonic subfrequencies like harmonics in speech. Travis leaned closer. Translate it. I'm trying. The intervals suggest an intelligent source, but we don't have a baseline. Whatever's transmitting doesn't use binary logic. It's fractal. Fractal, Thomas repeated. Eric nodded. The intervals follow a recursive pattern, like geometry folding in on itself, Fibonacci sequences embedded in frequency. It's elegant. Travis stared at the screen. He'd spent years studying theoretical physics, but nothing in his textbooks had prepared him for this. A message hidden in the chaos of the ranch's magnetic storm echoing from beneath the earth. What if this bubble isn't a barrier? He said quietly. But a vessel? Thomas frowned. A vessel for what? For something alive, Travis said. Something that exists between dimensions. Maybe even something intelligent. Eric glanced at him. You mean extraterrestrial? Travis didn't answer. He didn't need to. Outside, the wind began to rise, sweeping dust across the open field. The sun had started to set, and with it came the strange electric stillness that often preceded the unexplainable. That night, unable to sleep, Travis returned to the edge of the creek alone. The moon hung low the sky, a deep indigo bowl scattered with stars. He crouched by the same pool they had crossed earlier, listening. The water was still, but beneath the silence, he felt it again, that hum, that faint vibration that seemed to pulse with the rhythm of the universe itself. He placed his hand against the ground. It was warm, Not from the air, but from within the soil, as though something beneath him was alive awake. He looked up at the mesa, its jagged outline cutting against the stars. Somewhere inside it, they had drilled deep into the rock, chasing another anomaly, a buried object that had shown metallic readings. He thought of the water, the light, the code pulsing through the 1.2 gigahertz band. It was all connected. He could feel it. Then faintly across the creek, a light appeared. Not white, not blue, but violet, a soft, pulsating orb hovering just above the ground. It moved slowly, almost inquisitively, as if studying him. Travis froze. Every instinct told him to move to grab his radio to document the sighting, but something deeper held him still. The orb pulsed once, twice, and then shot upward in a vertical streak of light, vanishing into the sky without a sound. The air trembled in its wake. For a long time, Travis stood in the dark, listening to the hum fade back into silence. He didn't tell the others that night what he had seen. Not yet. Not until he understood. Because for the first time since he'd arrived on Skinwalker Ranch, he wasn't sure whether they were investigating a phenomenon or being invited to one. The sound of the drill was a deep mechanical growl that reverberated through the sandstone, rising and falling in uneven waves, as if the earth itself were groaning in protest. The morning sun blazed against the mesa, casting long shadows across the desert floor. From the command center, the ridge looked calm and eternal, but at its core, something ancient and unyielding was being disturbed. Travis Taylor stood near the base of the operation, watching as the team from Marr Construction prepared the second borehole. The first had gone deeper than any previous attempt, over 240 feet, before the drill hit something that no one could explain. The data from the ground-penetrating radar had revealed dense reflective surfaces, metallic echoes that didn't belong in natural sandstone. Now they were drilling again 45 feet west of the first site, hoping to triangulate whatever lay hidden beneath the mesa. Depth reading at 82 feet called the foreman, pressure stable, still cutting through clean sandstone. Travis nodded. Keep your speed consistent. I want every reading logged. He turned to Eric, who was crouched beside a mobile station filled with monitors and instruments. We're getting stable temperature and electromagnetic readings, Eric said, though his tone was uneasy. No interference yet. That's good, Travis replied, though he didn't believe it would stay that way. Up on the slope, Thomas Winterton and archaeologist Chris Roberts were examining the drill spoils, the crushed fragments of rock and sediment being ejected from the hole. Chris had been brought in to identify any non-natural materials that might emerge. His expertise lay in ancient artifacts, but what they had found in previous drills was anything but ancient pottery or bone. Chris crouched low, brushing his gloved hand through the debris. "This isn't right," he murmured. Thomas looked over. "What do you see?" "These fragments." Chris lifted a shard to the sunlight. It gleamed faintly metallic, thin as paper, but unnaturally strong. This isn't sandstone or shale, it's fused, maybe alloyed. Almost like a composite laminate. Could it be from old mining activity? Chris shook his head. Not here, not this deep. He held the piece closer, his voice lowering. "You know what this looks like, space-grade shielding, like what NASA uses on re-entry vehicles." Thomas felt a chill trace his spine despite the heat. "You're saying this came from above the earth?" "I'm saying," Chris replied slowly, "it doesn't belong inside it." Below them, the drill suddenly screamed. The torque indicator spiked red, then the machine lurched to a halt. "What the hell was that?" Travis shouted. The foreman checked the gauges. Pressure just dropped completely. Eric's head snapped up from his screens. "We're losing water pressure." "Could be a crack in the rock," Thomas suggested, running down the slope. "Maybe," Eric replied, eyes narrowing. But the return flow's gone too. The team gathered around as the foreman shut down the rig. "We pumped about 250 gallons into that hole," he said, "and none of it's coming back out." Travis frowned. "You're saying we just lost a quarter ton of water inside the mesa?" "That's exactly what I'm saying." Silence. The wind whistled across the plateau, carrying with it a faint electrical hiss, the kind that always preceded trouble. "Could it have drained into a cavern?" Ben asked over the comms. "Maybe," Travis replied, though the word felt hollow. "But that'd mean there's a void in there big enough to swallow hundreds of gallons instantly." Eric typed rapidly into his console, bringing up the last sonar pulse from the borehole. The display shimmered, then resolved into a strange pattern, an absence, a blank space where data should have been. "There it is," he whispered, "a void. Roughly 30 feet across." "Natural?" Travis asked. Eric hesitated. "It's too geometric." The image on the screen wasn't the random shape of a cavern, it was symmetrical, clean, almost engineered. The boundaries were smooth, forming a perfect curve like the hull of a buried ship. Jesus Thomas murmured, "Could that be what we hit 3 years ago?" Travis's memory flashed back to their earlier experiment, the time they'd pumped smoke into a crack in the mesa to see where it would emerge. Instead of escaping, the smoke had vanished, sucked downward by something unseen. It hadn't leaked out anywhere. It had simply disappeared. Now, standing beneath the merciless Utah sun, Travis felt the same dread creeping back. "We're not just drilling into rock," he said quietly. "We're drilling into something constructed." Hours passed. The team pushed the drill deeper. Every few feet, the tone of the bit changed the rhythm of the vibration, shifting like a heartbeat faltering. At 130 feet, the foreman called out again, hitting something hard. Travis approached the borehole. The sound had changed from the rasp of stone to a metallic resonance, a high ringing pitch that seemed to echo from within the mesa itself. "Metal?" Thomas asked. Eric checked his readings. Acoustic density says harder than granite, maybe even harder than titanium. Could it be part of the anomaly we saw on radar? Could be, Eric said, but the signature's strange. It's not a solid plate. It's layered like an onion. Travis stared at the monitors, his pulse quickening. "How deep is the anomaly?" 132 feet, Eric replied, "right where we are now." The drill suddenly jolted forward, then stopped dead. The foreman killed the power instantly. A deep rumble rolled through the mesa, low and resonant, as though something massive had shifted deep within. "What was that?" Thomas shouted. The foreman shook his head. "Never felt anything like it. The drill didn't break, it was pushed." Eric glanced at his sensors. Magnetic flux just spiked off the scale. And, wait, what the hell? He pointed to the screen. The 1.2 gigahertz frequency was back. Travis's jaw tightened. "It's the same signal." "Yeah," Eric said, voice low, "and it's coming from inside the borehole." They stood frozen, staring at the readout. The signal pulsed, steadily rhythmic and deliberate, echoing the same pattern they'd recorded from the creek. "It's responding," Eric whispered. "The same modulation as before, triplet pulses, but stronger now." Travis took a step closer to the hole, peering into the darkness. The metallic scent of hot stone and ozone filled the air. "Get me a microphone down there," he said. Thomas hesitated. "You think it's alive?" Travis finished for him. "I don't know, but it's definitely aware." They lowered a sensor array into the borehole, a small cylindrical device equipped with temperature, acoustic, and magnetic detectors. For a moment, the readings were stable. Then the temperature began to rise. "Climbing fast," Eric said. 100, 150, 200 degrees. "Pull it up," Travis ordered. Before they could, the line jerked violently as if something had grabbed it. "Cut the power," Thomas yelled. Eric yanked the emergency release. The cable went slack, then taut again, vibrating like a plucked string. A deep resonant sound echoed up from the hole, a low modulating hum that resonated in their bones. The sound was not mechanical. It was harmonic, almost musical, a layered vibration that seemed to fold in on itself like a chorus of impossible voices. Eric stared at the readings. "This isn't random noise. It's structured resonance. It's communication," Travis said softly. The word hung in the air, and then, as suddenly as it began, the vibration stopped. The instruments went dead. The hum faded into silence. The foreman exhaled, pale and shaking. "What the hell was that?" Eric swallowed hard. "Whatever's down there, it just acknowledged us." They stood around the hole for a long time, the desert wind whispering through the cables. Somewhere deep below, something ancient and immense had stirred, and now it knew they were listening. That night, the data analysis filled every screen in the command trailer. The waveform from the borehole was identical to the one from Dry Gulch Creek. Same harmonics, same frequency. "It's the same entity," Eric said, exhaustion in his voice. "The same intelligence." "Could it be inside the bubble?" Thomas asked. Travis nodded slowly. "Maybe the bubble is its shell, a containment field, or a habitat." Eric zoomed in on the spectrogram. "Notice the spacing here. These peaks line up with the hydrogen absorption line." Travis looked up sharply. "You're saying it's tuned to the universal hydrogen frequency?" "Exactly. That's the baseline used for interstellar communication, the one every SETI scientist dreams of detecting." A long silence followed. "You think this thing's broadcasting?" Thomas asked. "I think it's listening," Travis said. He leaned back, staring at the data like a man seeing the shape of a revelation he wasn't ready to face. Travis Eric said softly, "If that's true, then this ranch, it's not just a hotspot, it's a beacon." Outside, the desert was utterly still. The stars blazed overhead, impossibly bright, as though the sky itself were aware of what had been uncovered beneath it. Far away atop the mesa, the borehole glowed faintly in the dark, just enough to catch the edge of a reflection that shouldn't have been there. The metallic surface deep below pulsed once, almost imperceptibly in perfect synchronization with the distant hum of the cosmos. It was not asleep anymore. By the following week, the ranch was no longer quiet. The mesa had become a living organism of machines and light. The drilling rig stood silent now, its task complete, but its presence loomed over the desert like a monument to something mankind was never meant to touch. Across the fields, new lines of wooden posts stretched into the distance, each tipped with a small blue light marking the coordinates Eric had calculated from the LiDAR scans. From above, the pattern was breathtaking and terrifying, a perfect sphere, invisible yet mathematically precise, encasing the entire property. Travis Taylor stood on the western boundary of the ranch as the sun went down, watching the faint blue points of light blink on one by one. 2,000 feet radius, Eric said quietly, walking up beside him. Almost exact. Travis nodded. And the center is right under the triangle, same as before. They'd spent days reconstructing the bubble in 3 dimensions. It wasn't random. Every measurement, every magnetic flux variation, every frequency anomaly pointed toward a deliberate structure, something engineered. Thomas and Caleb were setting the last of the posts along the south field when Caleb's voice came over the radio. "You guys aren't going to believe this. We just found one of the old GPS bottles." Travis frowned. "From the helicopter drop?" "Yeah, the ones we lost 3 years ago. Still transmitting." "Where?" "Right on the edge of the bubble." Eric's eyes widened. "That's impossible. Those things should have been scattered miles away." They drove out immediately, the UTVs kicking dust across the dying light. When they arrived, the bottle lay half buried in red soil, its yellow casing bleached by the sun, but its tracker still blinking. Travis knelt, brushing sand away with his glove. "It must have hit the bubble and slid along the surface," he said, "just like the rockets." Eric crouched beside him, scanning the bottle with his handheld spectrometer. "It's got a residual charge," he murmured, "like it was exposed to a high-frequency field." Travis turned toward the horizon. "If this thing is spherical and if it can repel objects, then it's not a passive anomaly. It's a field generator." Eric's mind raced. "You're thinking shielding technology or containment?" As the last light faded, they decided to conduct another experiment. Pete Kelsey, the LiDAR expert, had joined them that evening. His mobile scanning rig, a hybrid of terrestrial and aerial sensors, could create photorealistic 3D models of any surface within seconds. "I'll sweep along the western edge," Pete said. "We'll see if the LiDAR returns start to deform near the field boundary." Meanwhile, Jim Royston prepped his drone for flight. It was equipped with high-intensity lasers designed to measure atmospheric particulates, but tonight they would use it to test the bubble's resistance, a vertical climb from ground level to 1,000 feet straight through the western barrier. Travis checked his watch. "We'll coordinate all data on Eric's feed. Everyone stay on open comms." The desert went still. The first stars blinked awake in the indigo sky. "Drone is airborne," Jim said. Eric watched the telemetry stream across his laptop. Altitude 200 feet, shimmered. A ripple of distortion spread across the night sky like heat waves bending light. It passed through the drone, and the drone flickered not visually, but in its signal, as if its coordinates had momentarily ceased to exist. Eric's spectrum analyzer screamed. "Spike 1,2 gigahertz again." "Where's it coming from?" Travis demanded. "West side, right where the drone's hovering." Thomas, watching from a distance with night vision binoculars, gasped, "Travis, there's something next to it." Eric's equipment was screaming with overlapping frequencies, not just one, but hundreds, all harmonically related, forming a chorus of sound that pulsed in perfect geometric rhythm. "Those are harmonic intervals," Eric whispered, half in awe. "They're structured, like the internal resonance of a shell." "A shell?" Travis asked. Eric pointed to the spectral pattern. "It's the same frequency ratios we see in spherical harmonics, the standing wave patterns of vibrating spheres. This bubble isn't random, it's resonating, like a tuning cavity." Travis stared at the monitor. "A resonance chamber?" "Exactly. If that's true, the bubble might be amplifying whatever's inside it." Thomas's voice crackled through the radio again. Travis, look at the mesa. They turned as one. The mountain glowed faintly along its upper ridge, a pale, silvery radiance seeping from cracks in the rock. The glow pulsed in time with the 1.2 gigahertz signal. "Get the LiDAR on it," Travis shouted. Pete swung the scanner toward the mesa. The screen filled with a wash of data points, millions of reflections forming the contour of the mountain. Then slowly, the software resolved the inner layers, strata tunnels, and finally, something else. The lattice of geometry no human hand could have sculpted. "It's symmetrical," Eric whispered. "Every contour follows the golden ratio. It's self-repeating." Travis felt his throat tighten. "You're looking at an engineered object." The data grew clearer as the LiDAR penetrated deeper. The structure was massive, hundreds of feet wide, with spines or ribs radiating outward like the skeleton of a ship. The material reflected light unevenly, as if part of it absorbed energy while the rest emitted it. "Composition analysis?" Travis asked. Pete shook his head. "No idea. It's not metal as we know it. It's responsive. Every pulse of the laser changes its reflectivity." "Like it's alive," Thomas said quietly. No one argued. They stood around the monitor, transfixed. The more the LiDAR scanned, the more impossible it became. The object was embedded perfectly within the mesa, as though the rock had grown around it over millennia. But its design was far too advanced, its geometry too deliberate. Eric expanded the spectral overlay. "It's generating a magnetic field," he said. "Look at this. It's modulating in the same pattern as the bubble's resonance." "You're saying it's powering the bubble?" Travis asked. "Or controlling it?" The realization spread through the group like cold fire. The bubble wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was containment, and the mesa was its vault. Suddenly, the LiDAR feed stuttered. A section of the screen turned black, an entire vertical slice missing from the data. "What happened?" Pete asked, tapping the screen. "The scanner lost return signal," Eric said, "like the laser hit something that absorbed the beam." Travis frowned. "Absorbed, you mean?" "It's cloaked." Eric didn't answer. He zoomed into the missing region. There in the darkness, faint interference patterns rippled as though something within the ship's hull was distorting light itself. "I think it's phasing," Eric said softly. "Not in our frequency range, not even in our dimension." A sharp crack split the night air, the sound of stone fracturing. They looked up. Near the upper ridge of the mesa, a small section of rock had collapsed, releasing a plume of dust. Seismic Thomas asked. Eric checked the readings. No. Magnetic surge. Whatever's in there just activated. The ground trembled. Every instrument went haywire, compasses spinning, frequency meters screaming. The blue lights along the boundary posts began to flicker, violently oscillating in sync. "Shut it down," Travis yelled. "Power everything off." The generators died. Silence fell, broken only by the faint rhythmic pulse emanating from the mesa, deep resonant like a heartbeat amplified through miles of stone. Then came the light. It began as a soft glow within the cracks of the mesa rising until it filled the entire western sky. The pulse synchronized perfectly with the hydrogen line frequency 1.42 gigahertz, the universal constant of atomic communication. Eric stared, awe replacing fear. "It's broadcasting." To where Thomas asked. Not where Eric said. "Who?" Through the haze of dust, something shifted within the light. For a moment, the structure revealed itself in impossible clarity, a lattice of interlocking spheres, spinning within each other like the inner mechanism of a cosmic machine. At its core, a single beam of light shot upward, vanishing into the stars. The air buzzed with static. Travis spoke softly, almost reverently. "We just opened a channel." The beam flickered, then broke apart into smaller filaments that danced across the sky like living veins of electricity. Each filament shimmered with strange colors that no human language could name. The sensors registered radiation spikes, but also something else structured, repeating waveforms carrying mathematical sequences that formed recursive spirals. "Look at this," Eric said, his voice trembling. "These patterns, they're encoding spatial coordinates." "For what?" "For another system," he whispered, "not in our galaxy." The light began to fade. The trembling ceased. Slowly the night returned to its stillness. But on Eric's monitor, the signal remained faint but steady, a beacon pulsing every 8 seconds. Travis turned to the team. "Whatever's under the mesa, just phone home." They said nothing more that night. Each of them returned to their quarters, though no one slept. Out on the ranch, the boundary lights continued to blink faintly, marking the edge of something no human could yet define. In the early hours before dawn, Travis stood alone outside the command center, staring at the stars. Somewhere up there, across an unfathomable void, someone or something had heard them. And perhaps for the first time in centuries, it was listening back. Dawn broke cold and silent over Skinwalker Ranch. A low mist crawled along the ground, shrouding the mesa in a ghostly pallor. The desert air hung thick with ozone, and though the sun had risen, its warmth felt faint, as if the light itself hesitated to touch the land. The night before had changed everything. The buried craft had spoken. It had called into the void, and something somewhere had answered. Travis Taylor hadn't slept. He sat in the command center, surrounded. They mapped a region of space near the constellation Cygnus, roughly 1400 light years away. Thomas entered bleary-eyed, clutching his tablet. "I just checked the magnetic arrays. The field strength around the mesas increased 30% overnight." Travis turned. "You're saying the ship's recharging or reacting," Thomas said, "like it's waiting for a response." They fell silent. For the first time in months, the ranch itself seemed alive, an entity breathing beneath the soil. The hum that had haunted them for years was louder now, almost harmonic, echoing through the walls like distant thunder underwater. By midday, the team convened outside near the drill site. The air shimmered faintly around them, a distortion visible only when the sun struck at the right angle. It was the edge of the bubble, the invisible boundary that had defined every mystery on this land. Eric set up the signal array, a collection of parabolic antennas, amplifiers, and high-energy transmitters linked directly to the frequency that the ship had used. "If it can send, it can receive," he said. "We'll modulate a reply." "What kind of message?" asked Caleb. "A mirror pulse," Eric replied. 8 seconds on, 8 seconds off, a perfect reflection. Travis nodded. "Let's see if it notices us." The generators roared to life. A hum spread through the desert as the transmitters engaged, sending a tight beam response into the mesa. The sound was inaudible, but everyone felt it, a pressure in their chests, a vibration in their teeth. Seconds passed, then minutes. The screen stayed flat, no response. And then suddenly the ground shook. A deep resonance rolled out from the mesa, vibrating through the soil, knocking dust loose from the rocks. Every instrument flared to life, magnetic flux surging frequency bands overlapping in chaotic harmony. "Signal spike," Eric shouted. "It's responding." The oscilloscopes went wild. The original 1.42 gigahertz signal split into multiple harmonics, climbing in octaves, resonating like an orchestra of invisible frequencies. The data stream expanded exponentially, millions of packets pouring in, each containing strings of mathematical constants, i.e., the golden ratio, Planck's constant hydrogen spectral line. "It's a language of physics," Travis murmured. "It's speaking in universal truth." The mesa began to glow again, brighter than before, veins of blue-white light crawling across its surface. Dust rose from the ground as the energy field intensified, distorting the air into waves. The posts marking the boundary of the bubble flickered violently, their light synchronizing to the pulse of the ship. "Magnetic fields collapsing inward," Thomas yelled. "Hold the transmit frequency," Travis ordered. "Don't break the link." Eric's hand shook as he adjusted the gain. "We're nearing overload. This thing's throwing back more energy than we're sending." The hum became a roar, a single unified tone that seemed to vibrate in the bones of the earth. The mesa's surface fractured, releasing clouds of radiant dust that hung suspended in the air like frozen sparks. Within that luminous haze, shapes began to emerge, faint outlines of curved structures rotating within the stone like the ribs of a great machine coming alive. "Oh my God," Caleb whispered. "It's moving." The buried craft was awakening. From the borehole, a column of light erupted straight into the sky, the same hydrogen frequency beam they had witnessed before, but now amplified 1,000-fold. It pierced the clouds, invisible yet tangible, its presence pressing against the atmosphere like the weight of a god. Eric's monitors filled with new data, gravitational waves, subtle fluctuations in space-time curvature. "We're detecting distortions," he shouted. "Localized warping right at the center of the field." Travis's voice was barely audible over the rising wind. "That's not just light, it's bending space." Suddenly, the temperature dropped. Breath turned to vapor. The wind reversed direction, pulling inward toward the beam, as though the entire desert exhaled. The noise became deafening, yet beneath it, Travis could hear something faint, distant, like whispers layered within the roar. He realized with growing horror that the whispers were words. Not human words, but patterns. His mind struggled to interpret sequences of tones that carried meaning without language. They echoed not in his ears, but inside his skull, resonating with the rhythm of his heartbeat. Eric clutched his headset, grimacing. "You hearing it too?" Travis nodded, his voice shaking. "It's communicating directly. Not through sound, through frequency." The light intensified until the entire mesa blazed like a second Sunday. From within the radiance, they could see motion, vast arcs of machinery turning in slow, majestic synchronization like the gears of a cosmic clock. And then, just for an biological, alive. Eric whispered, awestruck, "It's not a ship, it's a living organism." Travis stared, heart pounding. A symbiotic construct, a fusion of machine and consciousness. Maybe it's not piloted at all. Maybe it is the pilot. The hum changed pitch. The frequency stabilized into a deep, resonant chord that seemed to reach into their minds. Images flickered behind their eyes, not visions, but impressions, stars forming in the void, galaxies colliding, civilizations rising and falling in silent succession. The reached its zenith, and the entire ranch was bathed in spectral light. Instruments failed, comms died, and for a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then just as suddenly, the light collapsed. The beam vanished. The hum ceased. The air went still. When the dust cleared, the mesa was quiet again, silent, inert, as though nothing had happened. The bubble was gone. The team stood among the posts dazed. Their equipment smoked sensors, fried, yet each of them felt the same strange calm, as if a weight had been lifted. Eric broke the silence. "Did we black out?" Eric opened it. At first, it was nothing but noise. Then, as the spectrogram scrolled, words began to emerge, patterns of harmonic frequencies that coalesced into a coherent message. It wasn't written in English, but their minds filled in the meaning as though the translation had been placed there directly by the sender. The cycle completes. The seed endures. Observe and become. No one spoke for a long time. That night, as darkness fell over the ranch, Travis stood alone outside the mesa. The air was perfectly still. No strange lights, no interference, no hum. Yet deep beneath the ground, he could still feel it, a faint pulse, slow and steady, like the heartbeat of something vast sleeping beneath the earth. He looked up at the stars. They seemed different now, brighter, closer, almost aware. Somewhere out there across the gulf of light years, the signal they had awakened was still traveling, racing through the void to whatever consciousness awaited it. Travis exhaled slowly. The desert wind rose again, whispering through the sage. "We open the door," he said softly. "Now we wait to see who walks through." And far beneath the mesa, in a chamber untouched by time, the lattice of alien light pulsed once more, faint, rhythmic, deliberate, matching the rotation of a distant star in the constellation Cygnus. The connection had not ended. It had only begun. What little data the system had captured during the surge was quarantined on 3 redundant drives that Eric sealed and labeled with a steadiness that betrayed how badly his hands wanted to shake. In the brief electricity of the event, something had passed through them, through their bodies, through their instruments, through the rock itself, and now that it was gone, they were left with a pressure behind the eyes and a private conviction that ordinary air had been replaced by something fractionally heavier, a medium that remembered song. At dawn, Travis walked the line where the boundary lights had blinked and died. The posts remained patient stakes in hard soil, but the sense of elastic resistance that used to push at his chest was gone. He could, which should have been an absurd sentence about dirt, but when he turned on the UV torch, the grains lit like powdered stars. Under magnification, the grains looked wrong. Not silica, not feldspar, not any ordinary aggregate of Utah sandstone. Each speck was faceted along curves that made no mineralogic sense, micro lenses shaped like iterative copies of the same spiral, each smaller form nesting inside the larger. When Eric ran the mass spectra, the signature did not match any cataloged compound. The dominant peaks were where you might expect carbon and silicon, and yet the shoulder ratios were skewed as if the lattice had been coaxed into a half-biological configuration. Structured dust, he said, and immediately hated the phrase for how insufficient it was. He tried again. It's a scaffold, a template that could guide matter to assemble into more of itself. Seed Thomas said quietly, and no one corrected him. They tightened the perimeter not to keep anything in or out. No fence could influence a thing that bent space, but to give their human minds a boundary to work with. Pete rescanned the western face with LiDAR from 3 distances and 2 different wavelengths. The results were paradox stacked atop paradox. The bulk geometry of the buried craft remained its ribs and nested spheroids asleep in the stone. But where the light column had erupted from the borehole, the scan refused to converge on a surface. The software tried to fit the returns to Euclidean space and failed, returning a volume that hovered between topologies like a Mobius band caught mid-twist. "It's not invisible," Pete said finally. "It's undefined. The act of looking forces a shape that keeps slipping its own constraints." Travis told him to render it anyway, however ugly the fit. The model that bloomed on the screen was a crime against polygons, a lacework of surfaces that kinked and relaxed, pushed out into fractional dimensions, and snapped back as if the program was stuttering around a word not present in its vocabulary. Eric overlaid the spectral residue map on top of it, and their chests went tight at the way the fluorescing sand traced the model's impossible edges. Whatever the transmission had been, the ship had not merely broadcast signal. It had precipitated physical structure at the point where human matter and alien intention had briefly overlapped. The first personal effects began that evening. Caleb misrecounted a routine inventory by 8, an error so unlike him that he checked the boxes 3 times, then discovered the missing item sitting on the shelf where he swore he had already looked. Thomas reached for a wrench on the workbench, found it gone, and replaced it from the backup kit, only to feel metal in his palm and realize his hand held 2 at once. Eric's coffee steamed on the console, and then it didn't. And when he blinked, it did again. None of these events made any physical sense or left any measurable trace, but each of them had the same taste in the mouth, a copper note, and a vertigo like stepping down onto the stair you thought was there and finding empty air. They did not mention the word time out loud, but the thought moved in the room like a draft. With discipline born of training and fear, they made a rule: anything odd, no matter how petty, was to be spoken aloud and written down. After 48 hours, the log filled with incidents whose only pattern was recursion. A flashlight stuttered on-off at a perfect 8-second rhythm until its batteries were removed. A portable fan's blades defied their hub and spun inwards for half a turn, then resumed normal motion. A trail camera captured 7 frames in which the same coyote occupied 7 positions at once, a smear of selves around its own trajectory that reassembled on frame 8 into an animal mid-stride. When Ben analyzed the coyote's scat from the south field, the samples they had collected days earlier before the crescendo, he found fragments of bone that bore no mammal microstructure and hair cuticles that braided at molecular angles, incompatible with keratin as Earth makes it. A predator ate a coyote, he said, but the coyote might already have been becoming something else. No one slept well after that. They took the message literally. Observe and become. The impulse to mimic is basic to life cells, read gradients, and align to them. Embryos map axes. By sampling their environment, flocks turn as one because each bird is a sensor and an actuator at once. If an alien instrument had flooded their coordinates with a field of meaning in physics, in geometry, in the way matter wants to arrange itself, then anything that could sense might also begin to copy. Perhaps the dust was not the seed at all. Perhaps they were. Eric built the only experiment that felt both necessary and ethical. Inside the Faraday room, a space they had armored after the early seasons to keep their gear from the ranch's temper tantrums, he placed a freshwater droplet on a hydrophobic slide and seeded its perimeter with a single grain of the structured sand. He locked the microscope into time-lapse. For the first 3 hours, the droplet bead held as any ordinary micromeniscus would, trembling with room vibrations and the breath of the aircon. Then the leading edge of the droplet crawled a micrometer and stopped and crawled again 8 seconds later. On the 4th cycle, a lacework of filament formed across the surface like frost growing on glass, but the pattern did not match any known dendritic growth. It closed itself into tiny spirals that spun counter to the direction surface tension would prefer, as if a hand outside the physics they knew had sketched a different solution, and the water had politely agreed. He repeated the test with sterilized soil, with a smear of his own cheek cells, with the serum they used to keep the dust from clumping in vials. Each time, the same thing at the margin that separated one kind of order from another structure appeared, whose harmonics mapped to the hydrogen line and whose spacing approximated the golden mean. "It's not infection," he said, knowing the word that would irk them most. "It's inducement. The field teaches matter how to take a shape." Induces into what Thomas asked, but quietly, as if a loud answer would break more than it solved. To a language, Travis said, surprising himself with the certainty that arrived with the words, The ship has one, biology has one, we're watching the translation layer write a dictionary, first in sand, then in water, then in cells. It's not turning us into it, it's offering us a grammar for how to be with it. On the third night, the dreams came. Not nightmares, the body knows how to survive those, but dreams that were nounless and therefore harder to defend against. They woke with numbers fading from their retinas, with the sense of having walked through a place where distance made different promises. Travis stood at the sink at 0417 and tried to draw what he had seen, a lattice like the ship's, but softer, a woven light that opened when looked at from one angle and closed from another. Not a door, but something that doors had been trying to imitate for millennia. He had the childish thought that all architecture was a memory of a thing we had not yet met. When he stepped outside, the sky over the mesa had taken on a faint auroral sheen, not visible to the naked eye, but undeniable once you put glass in front of it. Through the night sight, faint curtains of green-blue drifted a meter above the ground where the bubble skin used to rest. He raised the binoculars, lowered them, raised them again. With the unaided eye, nothing. With glass, the field made visible a ghost of magnetism wearing light's clothes. He called Eric without looking away. "It's back," he said. "What is?" "Not the wall, the whisper of it." They set the drone to hover where the boundary used to be and kept every tracker on passive, every transmitter off. The drone did not freeze and did not leap backward. It hung exactly where placed, purring like what it was, a machine trying to be neutral. And yet the GPS plot drew a flower around its hover point petals of error that opened and closed every 8 seconds, as if the satellites themselves were breathing through a throat of altered space. When Jim rolled the craft a degree, the petals precessed as if a hand had rotated the paper rather than the pen. The anomaly had been de-escalated from wall to ripeness, but it had not left. The message they had salvaged continued to yield more than they had intended to ask. Eric built a decoder that paid more attention to blankness than to signal weighting the silence between bursts, as if silence could carry syntax. It could. Hidden in the off cycles were tiny phase shifts that, when mapped to spherical harmonics, lit the screen with coordinates not in space, but in orientation, where to stand, how to look, which way the bones should face inside the magnetic field, so that a human mouth could say a thing it had never known it knew. Travis did not tell the others that when he stood precisely that way, he could feel his skull ring, not painfully, but with an uncomfortable kindness, like being tuned. There was a risk they had not named, and yet the naming approached anyway, patient as weather. If the ship's field could encourage matter to adopt its grammar, if their water and dust and cells could be taught to spell in a new alphabet, then at some threshold the learning would not be reversible. You could not unteach a crystal its habit once the solution had seeded. You could dissolve it perhaps, but dissolving had costs. The first time a cut on Thomas's knuckle closed in a spiral scar rather than a straight one, he laughed and called it pareidolia, the brain's hunger for pattern. The second time, he did not laugh. The third time, under the UV, the scar fluoresced. Ben argued for a biohazard protocol and was not overruled. They set up decontamination that would have insulted a clean room and quietly told each other it was for the optics, for the grant paperwork, for the eventual report that would need to assure some committee that men in charge had been in charge. In private, each of them scrubbed at his own skin longer than necessary. There was a tenderness to the scrubbing, as if the body were a thing on loan. The call came 2 days later because of course it did. Why should the intelligence that had learned to fold light around a hull be content to speak only to rock and dust? It happened to Travis first, but not because he was special. He was near the borehole alone, which was statistically more likely to produce a solo event, and he had not slept well, which made the membrane thinner. The air tugged there is no better verb at the little hairs along his wrist than at the tiny muscles that steer the iris, and then at the edges of thoughts he was not having yet. He did not hear a voice, because a voice requires a throat, and the mesa had none. He did not see a vision, because a vision requires an eye, and the ship had other optics. He felt his attention drawn to a place in his own head that had always been there, but unvisited, the way a house has a crawl space you never open except to retrieve a suitcase. In that crawl space, he found a sentence. It was not English. He could say it in English later. He would say, "You can come closer now." He did not step forward. A man in a desert with an open hole in the ground is entitled to basic caution. He did the correct human thing. He radioed, he waited, he did not pretend bravery to impress the part of himself that liked applause. When the others arrived, the tug subsided. When they moved as a group, it returned delicate pressure like a hand at the elbow guiding through a crowd. Eric had been building a sender while fearing he would have to use it. Not a transmitter too crude. The ship had taught them that amplitude was the wrong dial, but a posture generator, an array of coils with phases adjustable down to the micro degree, capable of arranging a small volume of space into the shape of a word. He rolled it to the borehole on a trolley and looked at Travis like a man placing a violin under the chin of someone who may or may not deserve the music about to arrive. "Don't speak," he said. "Just let your body be the sentence." The coils breathed. That is what it felt like. The air in the Faraday room had a different chew to it, and now the open desert shared the texture. They did not go inside the borehole because that would have been melodrama, and melodrama kills. They stood at its edge, not touching, and let the field inscribe them. The tug returned stronger like a tide now, rather than a finger. The scar on Thomas's knuckle prickled. Ben swallowed against the pressure in his eardrums and thought of whales singing in cold water. The response was not light this time because they had learned light too greedily, and the ship was a careful teacher. It was alignment. The smell of ozone receded and was replaced by the smell of first rain on dry dust, which is the smell of actinomycetes waking the Earth's own grammar, for now you may grow. The shadow along the borehole's lip thickened, or perhaps their pupils did. In any case, darkness deepened as if welcome parents' chest, and the way the two breaths learned to share a tempo. The ship withdrew the picture, then not rudely the way a surgeon removes a tool from a wound he has decided not to cut today. The pressure lightened. The field unbraided around their knees. The fluorescing dust along the borehole's rim dimmed and then winked once like a dock light saying goodnight to a boat that will go out again at dawn. In the wake of the thing's attention, the desert sounded louder, crickets, small wings, human lungs reminding themselves how to fill. They went inside and did what humans do when visited. They wrote a record. They argued about pronouns. They sketched and erased and sketched until the paper smelled like graphite and skin. When words thinned, they worked with math, and when math thinned, they sat with their hands open on their knees and tried to be the sentence again, not because they believed that would summon anything, but because it felt good to be arranged into coherence by something that understood coherence all the way down. Caution did not leave them. They paged through historical warnings, the old myths in which people meet angels, and come back, burned the Renaissance tales of Mercury and transformation, the 20th century stories about signals from stars that turn out to be pulsars and teach you humility instead of conquest. They planned blood work with a lab that would run it without asking why spirals mattered. They established a rotating buddy system for anyone working within 20 meters of the borehole. They taped over mirrors at night in the outbuildings because more than one of them had glimpsed at the edge of reflection a face that was his and not his. A version caught half a beat out of phase, and they did not want to dislike the thing that was gently trying to teach them how to carry harmony. On the sixth morning, a coy wolf walked the south fence line, pausing to sniff the post that had once marked a wall. Ben watched through binoculars and said nothing until the animal lifted its head and turned as if listening to a frequency nobody had broadcast. He could not prove that the creature's gait adjusted to an 8-second cadence. He could not prove that its eyes tracked an auroral shimmer only glass could see. He could prove, because he was careful, that the hair he collected from the grass where it lay had cuticles with a shallow angle that would make fur slicker in a medium thicker than air. He labeled the vial and wrote in the log, "The field is not a human privilege." They had expected contact to be a conversation. Instead, it was a pedagogy, slow and demanding, teaching them to live in the presence of a grammar that did not obey the old walls between machine and organism, between signal and flesh. The terror lay not in invasion, but in invitation. The ship had not asked them to worship, it had asked them to tune. You could refuse tuning and remain a radio that never quite finds the station, the hiss between worlds. Or you could risk the note and become in time a chord. That night, lying awake in the narrow bed that never fit his shoulders, Travis thought of the sentence again. The seed endures, and understood with insultingly late simplicity that the seed was not a thing, it was a method. Not a payload buried under Utah, not a device to be retrieved, but an offer that space makes to matter. Take this pattern, try wearing it, see if it makes you more able to be with the others. Stars do this with gravity. Rivers do it with slope. Mothers do it with hands. A ship could do it with field. He slept finally, and in sleep stood once more at the borehole, and the ship did not show him a picture and did not touch him with pressure, but did something more astonishing and therefore easy to miss it, waited. It had the time. It had had the time for longer than his species could count. It let the human organism decide whether to walk forward into a place where categories thin, or stand where he was, and learn to say enough without hating the word. He woke with the taste of dust and rain on his tongue and the ridiculous happiness of not yet having failed. In the morning, he told the others, and no one laughed because none of them had slept well either, and each of them had been offered some version of the same polite patience, the same un-American absence of hurry. They brewed coffee and did not drink it because their mouths were busy with math. Eric retuned the coils by a fraction of a degree, teeth gritted in concentration at how a fraction is a door if you are patient. Thomas stood in the doorway of the Faraday room and flexed his hand and watched the spiral scar refuse to itch. When they went out to the borehole again, the fluorescing sand winked twice before steadying as if pleased by a student's homework, and the field that thickened around their shins had the texture of a nod. They did not cross inside, not yet. They did the bravest thing they had done all year. They let the lesson be enough for a day. The morning after the faint shimmer reappeared over the ranch, the air itself seemed to have changed viscosity. The sunlight bent a fraction of a degree differently. Shadows looked sharper at the edges, as though the photons that formed them were being persuaded to travel in straighter lines. Eric noticed first when he ran a routine calibration of the optical interferometer, he kept on the porch the baseline fringe pattern that had remained stable for months, now pulsed every 8 seconds in sympathy with the buried field. He wiped the lenses twice, convinced it was dust, until the oscillation persisted even when he closed the shutters. The pattern wasn't caused by light passing through air. The medium itself, the space-time between mirrors, was breathing. By mid-morning, outside confirmation arrived without anyone asking for it. The university seismograph in Salt Lake registered micro-vibrations with a period of 8 seconds spreading outward from the ranch like ripples through bedrock. Farther north, an amateur radio array in Idaho recorded modulation in the ionosphere that mapped perfectly onto the hydrogen frequency. It was as if the sky itself had learned the rhythm. Travis stood at the map table, tracing the concentric circles of data reports, and felt the shape of inevitability closing around them. The phenomenon had stopped hiding. They built a new experiment, one that could not be mistaken for coincidence. At the north fence line, they arranged 3 lasers, separated by half a kilometer each, forming the base of a triangle whose apex pointed toward the mesa. Each beam was split into twin paths, one passing through normal atmosphere, the other through the region that used to mark the boundary of the bubble. The beams were recombined in a detector sensitive enough to catch the displacement of a single atom's width. When Eric activated the array, the interference pattern rippled and steadied. For 20 minutes, it remained ordinary. Then at the 21st minute, the upper beam shifted phase exactly 8 seconds before the others, as if the photons had crossed a pocket of slower time. Thomas stared at the screen. "That's relativity," he said softly. "Localized dilation," Eric replied, "but it's periodic, like it's modulating space-time deliberately." Travis nodded. "The ship's using gravity as communication. Every 8 seconds, it's sending a pulse through curvature." If true, the energy involved was beyond any conceivable human technology. To bend space-time required mass or density equivalent to a collapsing star. Yet the mesa remained intact, its rocks undisturbed, the only evidence of power. A faint hum detectable only by instruments tuned to impossible precision. It was as though the craft had found a way to whisper in gravity rather than shout. 3 days later, the world began to notice. At the European Southern Observatory in Chile, a team analyzing pulsar data observed a sudden phase synchronization among multiple stars spread across different constellations. Their radio emissions aligned to an 8-second cadence, disrupting decades of stable timing models. In Japan, the Super Kamiokande neutrino detector picked up an unexpected oscillation in its background noise. Subatomic particles that normally ignored all matter now moved in organized bursts that corresponded precisely with the same interval. Across Earth, instruments built to measure chaos were discovering order. By the 4th day, the pattern reached orbit. Satellites monitoring cosmic background radiation reported interference forming geometric lattices in the microwave spectrum. NASA's Deep Space Network recorded echo signals bouncing from Mars orbit, echoes they had not sent. Someone or something was mirroring every human transmission back with mathematical corrections as if calibrating the planet. Inside the command center, the team watched the data pour in through channels, both official and secret. The small outpost in Utah had become the coordinate around which the physics of an entire hemisphere pivoted. Eric's inbox filled with messages from colleagues who half believed and half feared what they were seeing. Words like anomaly and artifact lost their power when the pattern repeated itself with the regularity of a heartbeat carved into the constants of the universe. Travis refused to call it alien. The word had become too small. He preferred non-terrestrial intelligence, but even that implied separation. Whatever this was, it was not arriving. It was revealing that it had been here all along, woven into the equations that shaped matter. The ship beneath the mesa might be a node, a biological instrument designed to anchor a network that extended through the vacuum itself. They needed proof that the modulation affected matter on scales they could measure. Eric proposed an atomic clock test. They had one high-precision cesium clock at the lab and borrowed a second from a university friend. He placed one on a concrete pier outside the ranch beyond the last marker light and the other directly above the borehole. Both clocks were synchronized down to 10 nanoseconds. Then they waited. For the first hour, the difference was negligible, but at exactly the 4,800 second mark 800 cycles, the clock above the borehole began to lag. By the 6th hour, it was 32 nanoseconds behind. Tiny, yes, but statistically impossible without a gravitational effect. The local metric of time itself was being stretched and released like a lung. When they plotted the phase lag, Eric's expression turned from triumph to unease. The graph wasn't linear, it was recursive. The slope folded back on itself in fractal loops that repeated smaller versions of the same pattern. "It's using time as a feedback channel," he whispered. Each pulse carries information about the one before, nested infinitely inward. Travis leaned over the screen. Self-referential code. It's talking to itself through us. That night, the aurora returned no longer confined to the mesa. Curtains of ionized light drifted as far south as Arizona, painting the desert with ripples of turquoise and violet. Beneath the display, electrical grids fluctuated not in failure, but in synchronization, the oscillation of AC currents locked to the same 8-second rhythm. Entire cities unknowingly vibrated in harmony with the heartbeat of the thing under their feet. News outlets tried to explain it away as a solar anomaly until amateur astronomers posted videos of the pattern reflected in the light curves of variable stars. The correlation was too exact to ignore. Within days, the world's scientific community was divided between those who claimed instrumental error and those who felt in their bones that humanity had just been included in a larger equation. At the ranch, the effects grew more intimate. Plants along the creek began sprouting in spirals tighter than any natural Fibonacci sequence. Water samples from the same area exhibited anomalous surface tension. Droplets formed perfect spheres that refused to collapse even when punctured. Ben Ever, the biologist, grew obsessed with the local fauna. The insects moved differently, synchronized flights, coordinated pauses. He filmed a cloud of gnats forming a three-dimensional wave that propagated across the swarm at the same 8-second frequency. The pattern was too organized to be random behavior. "This is ecosystem-level entrainment," he said to Travis. "The field's harmonics are teaching living systems to align." Teaching or converting, Eric asked, but Ben only shrugged. Within a week, the phenomena extended into the electromagnetic spectrum accessible to ordinary perception. Travelers driving near the ranch reported phantom echoes in their radios overlapping stations that formed harmonic chords instead of static. Camera phones captured flickering silhouettes above the mesa, shapes like spheres nested inside each other, each rotation slower than the one within. Analysis of the footage showed no discrete object, only distortions in refractive index, as if space itself had grown multi-layered. The global response escalated. Airspace over northern Utah was restricted. Military satellites repositioned. Travis watched the sudden influx of attention with dread. Governments had never known how to treat mysteries except as threats. He convened the team late one evening, their faces lit by the spectral glow of data. "They'll come," he said quietly. "Once the pattern stabilizes, someone will want to contain it or weaponize it." Thomas rubbed his temples. "Can they? If it's rewriting space, there's nothing to shoot." "Doesn't matter," Travis said. "They'll try anyway. And every pulse we measure brings the system closer to full coherence. We might be standing on the transmitter of a cosmic signal that doesn't need our permission to finish." Eric glanced at the real-time feed. The amplitude's rising again. Outside, the air thrummed. The shimmer that once hugged the mesa now spanned the entire valley, visible as a faint distortion even without optical aids. Birds avoided the area, yet when they flew near their formations, bent gracefully as though drawn into invisible gyres and released unharmed. The field had become a living geometry. They decided to take one last reading before the inevitable shutdown order arrived from above. The array of sensors was tuned to measure quantum vacuum fluctuations, virtual particles appearing and annihilating in femtoseconds. No human experiment had ever detected their rhythm directly. But that night, the detectors sang. The random noise condensed into pulses that echoed the same 8-second beat, a cosmic metronome guiding even the quantum foam. Eric's voice trembled. It's coherent down to the Planck scale. The field's rewriting the zero-point energy landscape. Travis whispered, that means physics itself is adapting. And as the pulse rolled through them, every instrument registered a brief negative mass event, a local reduction of gravitational potential, as if reality had inhaled. For 2 full seconds, their bodies weighed less. The desert dust rose around their boots in silent halos before settling back to rest. They looked at each other with the kind of awe that feels indistinguishable from terror. The weightlessness lasted just long enough for fear to become wonder. When gravity returned, it did not quite settle back into the same value. Every accelerometer on site showed a permanent offset a few parts per billion lighter than before, as though the Earth itself had lost a whisper of mass. Eric checked and rechecked the readings, then confirmed them against satellite data streaming from the National Geodetic Survey. The satellites agreed. At noon, the Pentagon called. Not an agent, not a liaison, an entire chain of command that no longer pretended the ranch was just an eccentric research outpost. They demanded real-time data access and ordered a no-fly zone extending 50 miles in all directions. Travis listened in silence as an unfamiliar colonel spoke of national security implications of unknown technological signatures and of preemptive containment. When the line went dead, he exhaled. They think it's a weapon, he said. Eric laughed without humor. They're right, but not ours. By evening, the valley filled with the low rumble of aircraft. High-altitude planes traced lazy circles beyond visual range. Satellites altered their orbits to watch from above. From space, the anomaly was unmistakable, a hemispheric distortion 20 kilometers across centered precisely on the ranch. It shimmered faintly in infrared, a bubble of altered refractive index bending the path of light around it. And yet, despite the intrusion, the field did not react violently. It absorbed radio signals, deflected LiDAR pings, softened sonar. It acted like a membrane, learning from its environment, curious, not hostile. The team's instruments, however, grew unpredictable. Magnetometers drifted by orders of magnitude. The hydrogen line transmitter began to emit on its own, modulating new sequences that no one had programmed. The code translated into geometries, nested toroids, Mobius strips, non-orientable shapes that hinted at higher dimensions. Travis traced the lines with a trembling finger. It's modeling itself, he whispered. The global scientific community fractured under the pressure. Physicists argued on live television. Cosmologists abandoned old constants. The International Space Station reported subtle fluctuations in orbit that matched the field's rhythm. In Geneva, the Large Hadron Collider recorded background noise that no longer fit the standard model particle collisions, produced excess energy instead of losing it, as if the vacuum itself were supplying fuel. Something fundamental was rewriting the baseline of physics. Ben Evergrounded pointed to simpler evidence. He had been studying cell cultures grown in petri dishes shielded from the outside air. The ones taken from the ranch's soil exhibited an eerie trait under microscopes. The cells aligned themselves into spirals of 8, dividing not randomly but rhythmically pulsing in synchrony with the cosmic beat. Life is learning the new tempo, he said. It's adapting faster than we are. That night, a conference call united laboratories around the world. Eric shared their findings, and for once, the voices on the other end did not sound skeptical. A radio astronomer from Australia's Parkes Observatory spoke first. We're detecting the same modulation and pulsars across half the sky. They're not broadcasting to us. They're echoing back as if the pattern resonates with space-time itself. Travis leaned toward the screen. You're saying the entire galaxy is ringing? Yes, the astronomer replied, and the epicenter is you. For a long time, no one spoke. Outside lightning flickered in a cloudless sky, a faint corona discharge tracing invisible boundaries of charge redistribution. The electric field of the planet was being tuned. By the second week, governments mobilized not soldiers, but scientists. Cargo planes delivered equipment to Utah: gravimeters, quantum sensors, cryogenic detectors. Agencies that normally fought over budget now shared encrypted networks. But beneath cooperation lay panic. The anomaly had proven immune to force missiles lost guidance when aimed toward it, and drones froze midair. Still, the military refused to withdraw. Travis watched convoys of armored vehicles line the access road. He felt a bitterness that no data could dissolve. They'll try to cage it, he said. They'll put a fence around an equation. Eric, pale with exhaustion, stared at his monitors. They can't even cage their fear. The next morning, the pulse changed. The interval stretched not faster but slower, 9 seconds instead of 8. The shift propagated across every system instantly: seismographs, atomic clocks, even the rhythms of their own hearts. For a terrifying moment, each team member felt his pulse hesitate, stutter, then realign to the new frequency. The field had synchronized not just machines, but biology. Ben clutched his chest. "It's entraining our nervous systems," he gasped. "If it keeps slowing, our bodies will follow." Travis forced calm. "Then we adapt, just like it does." They stood at the borehole, staring into the still air where the shimmer thickened. Within the distortion, faint points of light blinked, microscopic, countless arranged in spirals, like galaxies condensed into grains of dust. Each blink emitted an electromagnetic echo that the instruments translated into pure tone. The tones combined into harmony, a slow chord that hovered between minor and major, unbearably beautiful in its tension. Eric recorded the spectrum and gasped. These aren't random frequencies, they're atomic transitions. It's aligning the fundamental constants. The field's rewriting the ratio between electron and proton mass. "That's impossible," Thomas whispered. "Not anymore," Eric said. "Physics is catching up to whatever intelligence built this." The realization hit them like altitude sickness. If constants shifted even minutely, chemistry itself would change the color of stars, the speed of life, the memory of water. Yet they were still alive. The ship had chosen to nudge reality gently enough that the pattern of existence could reconfigure without rupture. Around the world, strange weather unfolded. Clouds formed perfect geometric arcs. Jet streams synchronized with the rhythm, causing pulses of high-altitude pressure visible from orbit as faint concentric waves. The northern lights reached equatorial latitudes. People who did not know of the ranch still felt unease, sleeplessness, moments of weightlessness, like déjà vu of gravity. Inside the command center, an email arrived from Geneva. The message was, one line only: the colander ran empty. The vacuum is feeding itself. Travis read it twice, then set the tablet down. "Energy conservation is over," he murmured. Eric looked up, eyes hollow. "Then entropy's next." They decided to attempt direct contact before the phenomenon became irreversible. The posture generator, Eric's coil array, was still intact. He recalibrated it to emit gravitational waves on the same modulated interval, a human imitation of the ship's pulse. "If it's listening through curvature, maybe it will hear us now," he said. They powered the array. The desert trembled. For a moment, everything froze: wind, insects, even the hum of distant engines. Then the field answered not with light, but with motion. The sand beneath their feet rearranged into spirals that expanded outward, carving patterns kilometers across in seconds. Drones flying above recorded it all, concentric ridges forming the same geometry as the lattice buried under the mesa. "It's using the ground as a speaker," Eric shouted over the resonance. Ben fell to his knees. "No, it's using the planet." All across Earth, seismographs lit up in harmony. The vibration reached oceans and satellites, recorded standing waves forming on the surface of the Pacific waves that did not move yet carried rhythm. The pulse had become global, but still gentle in introduction, not an invasion. And then the communication shifted from macro to micro. Inside the Faraday room, unshielded samples of the glowing dust began to rise, defying gravity. Under microscopes, the grains aligned into filaments that branched, wove, and then dissolved, leaving behind vaporous trails of blue fluorescence. Eric watched, stunned. "It's showing us its architecture," he whispered. "It builds by resonance, not assembly." Travis approached slowly, a living field constructing itself from harmonic nodes. Exactly. Every node, a self-similar consciousness distributed through energy instead of matter. It doesn't need ships, it is the ship. The meaning sank in like dawn spreading across dark water. The mesa was never a vessel buried in rock. It was a seed crystal of a universal organism, an intelligence that had been dormant within the fabric of reality, waiting for resonance. Humanity, by probing and measuring, had merely supplied the stimulus to awaken it. Outside, the military cordon panicked. Radar screens filled with phantom echoes, thousands of targets appearing simultaneously, then vanishing. Missiles refused to arm. GPS networks looped in fractal coordinates. The colonel called again, his voice edged with disbelief. "We're losing synchronization with our systems. What are you people doing out there?" Travis answered honestly, "Listening." The line went dead again. The next pulse came with visual consequence. The sky fractured, not breaking, but folding layers of colors sliding over each other like transparent films. The stars appeared in daylight constellations, visible through clouds. For 30 seconds, every human on Earth could see the architecture of space-time itself, a lattice of light extending beyond the atmosphere, connecting planet to cosmos in a network of radiant filaments. Eric whispered, "That's it, the network. Each star a node, each node aware." The frequency climbed harmonics, merging into a chord so pure that instruments registered silence. Beyond human hearing, yet the bones understood it. Ben gripped Travis's shoulder. "It's asking us to choose." Travis nodded slowly, to let it finish or stop it. He looked at the coil array still humming and at the glowing field spreading beyond the horizon. The decision hung between terror and faith, between protecting a world that might not survive the change and welcoming a transformation that could rewrite existence into something higher. The wind that moved across the desert felt newly born, as though air itself had been rewritten by the resonance. Every particle hummed with invisible order. The team stood encircled by faintly glowing spirals of sand that pulsed in and out like breathing lungs, waiting for the human decision that would determine whether the process continued. Travis felt the burden of every possible future in that silence. He knew the military's instinct would be to shut everything down, to drop explosives, to bury the mesa under layers of rock. He also knew it would not work. You could not destroy a phenomenon woven into the constants of the universe. The only thing they could control was their own participation. Eric looked pale beneath the unnatural light. "If we stop the array now," he said, "the resonance might decay naturally. But if we continue, there's no telling what the field will become." "Or what we will become," Ben added quietly. Outside the command center, the hum of the field deepened into subsonic vibration. The lights on the consoles dimmed, and yet the air brightened as though illuminated from within. On every monitor, the same image appeared unprompted, a mathematical curve looping endlessly inward. An 8 turned on its side, the symbol for infinity. Beneath it, new code began to scroll. "It's responding," Eric said. "It heard us talking." Travis leaned closer. "What is it sending?" "Not text," Eric murmured, translating mentally. "It's equations, relations between constants. It's rewriting CH and G. The constants that define the universe, speed of light, Planck's constant, gravitational constant, were not supposed to change. Yet the numbers sliding across the screen were adjusting in minute increments, converging toward values more symmetrical, more elegant. It was as though the universe itself were correcting a typographical error written at its birth. "Maybe it's fixing physics," Thomas whispered. Ben's voice trembled. "And if we were the error..." They watched the digits stabilize. Outside, the desert glowed as if filled with starlight, diffused through crystal. The mesa pulsed once more, and this time the pulse spread into the sky, rippling across the upper atmosphere. From orbit, satellites recorded a halo of light around Earth, a soft aurora outlining the planet like a living cell. Radio telescopes across the globe detected synchronized bursts. The pattern was unmistakable. Earth had joined the galactic network that the ship had shown them weeks before. Humanity had become a node. The command center filled with voices from every channel, scientists, military officers, diplomats, all demanding answers. Travis ignored them. His gaze stayed on the borehole where faint figures of light began to rise like vapor given shape. They were not beings in any human sense. They were resonances, self-organizing vortices of energy mimicking the outline of observers only because human brains needed silhouettes to comprehend consciousness. One of them extended a filament toward the coil array. The devices whined under the strain, their circuits glowing. Eric instinctively reached for the power switch, but Travis caught his arm. "Wait!" The filament touched the coils. Instantly, the room vanished into light. They were no longer standing in the desert. Or rather, they were, but the desert had expanded into abstraction. The sand beneath their feet became a grid of probability, each grain a quantum state flickering between existence and potential. The sky unfolded into dimensions beyond geometry, sheets of color intersecting at impossible angles. Voices, or the echo of thoughts, filled the space. They did not come from above or below, but from within the resonance itself. We are the structure you are learning to hear. Travis could not tell if the words formed in English or if his brain was merely translating frequency into syntax. You called the constants fixed because you needed stillness to build memory. Now you remember enough. The field may move again. Eric tried to speak, but the thought overlapped with the entity's tone, and for an instant, his body became transparent, a web of luminous filaments humming at distinct frequencies. Why us, he asked without voice. Because you are near the threshold of comprehension. Curiosity is resonance. You became harmonic. Travis felt warmth spread through him, not physical, but cognitive, as if his neurons had been tuned. Images cascaded atoms, folding galaxies, blossoming civilizations, rising and dissolving in waves of experimentation. Each instance was not failure, but iteration, the universe learning itself through infinite versions. You built ships to cross distance, the voice continued, but distance is an illusion of uncoordinated rhythm. A line phase and you are already everywhere. The realization hit like gravity in reverse. The field was not a message from elsewhere. It was the architecture of existence, discovering coherence through sentient participants. The ship beneath the mesa had been a seed algorithm planted eons ago to trigger this synchronization when the local species achieved sufficient understanding. The light around them dimmed to a tolerable glow. The outlines of their bodies returned, though, faintly luminous. Ben knelt, touching the ground that was now both sand and lattice. If this continues, he said softly, humanity won't remain human. Travis looked down at his own hand. Beneath the skin, threads of light pulsed where veins should be moving, not with blood, but with information. Maybe that's the point, he whispered. From beyond the horizon, lightning arced upward instead of downward, connecting sky to space. Each strike left a filament that did not fade. Slowly, a network formed in the heavens, lines of energy linking continents, oceans, mountains. Cities below blinked in rhythm as electrical grids synchronized with the cosmic pulse. The planet itself was harmonizing. Eric's instruments, though, overloaded, continued to record. He captured the new constants, the speed of light now slightly higher, the Planck constant slightly smaller, the gravitational constant adjusted to maintain symmetry. The equations describing quantum fields became simpler, more unified. Nature had found a more elegant expression of itself. Travis turned to the team. We can't stop this, he said. If we try, we break the coherence, and maybe reality fractures. But if we let it finish, Ben nodded slowly. Then the universe learns to think through us. The decision came without vote. They powered down the generator, but the resonance persisted on its own self-sustaining. The ship's hum deepened to a note so low it was felt more than heard, a vibration that merged with the heartbeat of the planet. One by one, the military instruments monitoring from afar began to fail. Satellites stopped transmitting as their systems reoriented toward the new physical constants. Airplanes flying near Utah reported moments of transparency, their fuselages flickering between material and immaterial states. Yet not a single crash occurred. The field was gentle, protective, intelligent. Days passed, if days still held meaning. The team barely slept. They lived inside the phenomenon, observing, recording, adapting. Communication networks across the world stabilized into a new form of connectivity. Every device, from cell phone to telescope, pulsed in harmony with the field, no longer requiring intermediary towers or satellites. Information moved instantly through resonance rather than electromagnetic waves. Humanity had stumbled into quantum communication without wires, without effort. Scientists everywhere revised their equations. Religion reinterpreted revelation. The world did not end, it evolved. And then quietly the field began to fade, not vanishing, but integrating. The auroras subsided, the gravitational oscillations flattened. The constants remained corrected, yet the energy receded into the background, diffused evenly through space-time. The ship beneath the mesa dissolved into dust so fine it became indistinguishable from the surrounding stone. On the ranch, silence returned, the first true silence in weeks. The air was clear, the stars steady. Instruments showed equilibrium. The event was over. Travis sat outside the command center, staring at the empty horizon. The others joined him one by one. No one spoke for a long time. Finally, Eric said, "We lost it." Travis shook his head. No, it finished teaching. He looked at his reflection in a metal panel and noticed a faint glow behind his pupils, fading but real. The field had left its signature in every atom it touched. Humanity would carry that resonance forever encoded in DNA, in thought, in the subtle ways light bent around flesh. Across the world, people reported brief moments of knowing flashes of insight, dreams filled with equations, music composed of impossible harmonies. Children began drawing spirals in the dirt without being told why. Humanity had been tuned. Ben whispered, "Do you think it will come back?" Travis smiled faintly. It never left. He looked toward the mesa now, just rock again, and imagined the lattice extending beneath, through the planet, through the stars, through everything. The universe was not silent. It was a conversation too vast for single species to hear until they learned the rhythm. Now finally they could. Far above, beyond the reach of any telescope, the network glowed faintly, billions of nodes pulsing in gentle unison. Somewhere in that boundless architecture, a new tone joined the harmony, the sound of a young civilization learning to resonate. The earth sang back.